Hello everybody, welcome to this new episode of This Week in Tech. This week we have a lot of crazy stuff to talk about. We're gonna talk about Google creating a new AI algorithm that can write code as good as an average developer. We're gonna talk about Spotify's problems with Joe Rogan and COVID misinformation. Then self-driving cars, we have some good and some bad news. And last but not least, new moves from Instagram towards the metaverse. So let's get started immediately. Deepmind announced a new AI algorithm that seems to be able to write code as good as the average developer. But let's try to understand a little bit better what this means. Let's start with Deepmind. Deepmind is an AI research company owned by Google. So a lot of times they don't focus on stuff that has an immediate commercial application, but they focus on fundamental research. And they've been really good at building some crazy stuff that then at some point has had a commercial spin-off for Google. So the latest challenge was to try to build an AI algorithm that could compete in coding competitions. Coding competitions are competitions where developers challenge themselves as solving different coding problems. So Deepmind developed an algorithm that was able to perform better than 54% of all the different competitors in these coding competitions. Let's see how they did it. The first step was to train this algorithm on a lot of open source code from GitHub, that is an open source code repository. After they've done this first, let's say more generic training, because there's a little bit of everything on GitHub, then they've done some fine tuning by training these algorithms specifically on coding competitions. And the way that algorithm works is very similar to how a developer works. When you have a coding problem, it's very rare that you're able to immediately find the solution. Most of the times you just try to a bunch of different things and then you see what works, see what doesn't work, solve a few bugs, and then you may get to the right answer to that specific problem. So what Deepmind did was very similar. This algorithm fine-tuned on this coding competition. When it saw a new problem, it tried to write a bunch of different solutions, even thousands of them in Python and in C++. Then it was able to rank all these solutions and then find the best one that could potentially solve that problem. So then Deepmind benchmarked this algorithm against all the participants on this website called Codeforces, and they found out that it was better than 54% of the humans. Now, you may be worried about, oh my god, humans are gonna lose all the jobs, everything's gonna be taken over by AI. Well, of course, I don't have the answer to this question. It's a very complex problem. But something that we need to say here is that coding competitions are very different from real-world coding. So usually in real-world coding, you want to go somewhere, you want to build something, and then you need to design a way, an architecture of this code that is going to bring you to the result that you want to get. So it's very rare that you have a problem that has a very clear beginning and a clear end, like in coding competitions. So the transfer between the two is not immediate, but I can definitely imagine a world where developers design the architecture of a software, but I don't waste time in writing the single functions and all the different modules that you need to solve that problem. So this is not gonna replace coders, I believe, but it's gonna make their life so much easier. So something that I think may happen that is not great is that very experienced coders keep working because they're the ones that can do this architectural design better than everybody else. But the least experienced coders, they probably gonna have a hard time beating this kind of algorithms in the near future. So let's see how this evolves. On the 31st of December 2021, Joe Rogan had as a guest on his podcast Dr. Robert Malone. He is one of the pioneers of the mRNA technology that is used in different vaccines like the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. And Dr. Robert Malone has been kind of a weird voice in this whole conversation about COVID and vaccines. Because even though he's a doctor and technically he's one of the people that contributed the most to this technology, he is really against vaccines. So he went on this podcast and said what he thought. He thought that they were hurtful, that they were bad for people, etc., etc. What happened then is that a lot of people got really angry with Joe Rogan for inviting this person that spreads misinformation about COVID, but also to Spotify for allowing Joe Rogan to spread this kind of misinformation on his podcast. So a bunch of doctors and scientists wrote a letter to Spotify asking to take out that podcast episode. And on top of that, a bunch of artists like Neil Young said, hey, Spotify, if you don't take out that piece of content, I'm gonna take my music out of your platform. And Spotify took a really strong stance. They said, hey, we wanna allow creators to be free, to say whatever they want on our platform, as long as it's not hate speech. That's so far the only red flag that Spotify has. So they decided to let Joe Rogan have this episode over there. And Joe Rogan answered as well. He said, well, guys, there's a lot of theories that seem wrong until somebody proves them right. And I want to hear all sorts of opinions. I invited a guy who's, again, a doctor, so he has something that seems to be kind of scientific about it. He's not just coming up with random ideas. Now, I have no idea whether Dr. Robert Malone is right or wrong, but there's a crucial point that I want to talk about here. I don't want to talk about vaccines and stuff because I don't know enough to cover this topic. But I want to talk about the role that platforms like Spotify can have in trying to decide what goes on the platform and what does not go on the platform. The situation is very complex. Where do you draw the line between this is content that is allowed to be here and content that is not allowed to be here? Why hate speech has to be out of Spotify, but what it's today considered as misinformation can be there? Somebody has to take a decision. And what I think is really interesting is that Spotify had a stronger content moderation policy in 2018 when they were trying to remove also artists that did some really controversial things in their private life, and they wanted to try to censor them. And they faced a huge backlash. So it sounds like the threshold where a company should get in and decide to moderate, it's not easy to understand for anybody. But something else that we need to add is that in this case, Joe Rogan is not just a creator. Spotify bought his podcast to have exclusive rights to host it on their platform and not nowhere else for $100 million. So Joe Rogan is not like me, who I have my little podcast Tech Pizza hosted on Spotify. By the way, you should listen to it, it's pretty cool. Joe Rogan is somebody that has a business relationship with Spotify. So I don't see how Spotify is in an unbiased position to take decisions with Joe Rogan's podcast that then can be applied to, my podcast or all the other podcasts. It's really complicated, and I think platforms still haven't found a way to regulate themselves in terms of deciding what is allowed and what is not allowed to be posted, to be shared. And I think, honestly, they will be happy to have the government telling them, hey, this is what you have to do. That's it. That's what Mark Zuckerberg has said in a few interviews, and I guess Spotify will be in the same position. So let's see how it evolves. So far, Spotify is keeping that podcast episode. I just want to add one more thing that is pretty funny. While artists like Neil Young said, I'm going to take my music out if you don't take that podcast off the platform, James Blunt said, hey, I'm going to release more music if you don't take that podcast out. Because I guess everybody's kind of tired of James Blunt. It's the guy who made You're Beautiful. You're beautiful. I don't want to listen to that stuff anymore. Let's talk about self-driving cars. If you followed this series, you know that Tesla announced a new mode called assertive mode that allows their full self-driving car to start driving in a little bit more assertive way. So that means keeping a shorter distance through the other vehicles, going maybe a little bit faster, doing faster lane changes. But one feature that I said some weeks ago, this is crazy, was the rolling stop feature. That means that Tesla, when they saw a stop but there was no one around, they will not stop, which it's not just unsafe, it's illegal. Well, guess what? Big surprise, nobody expected that. The US government told Tesla, you can't do this. You have to roll back that feature. So Tesla had to recall 54,000 vehicles and update their software so that they will stop performing this rolling stop. Who would have guessed? Wow, just like crazy idea, huh? So these are the bad news for self-driving. The good news, at least if you're somebody like me who really wants to stop driving and has self-driving cars, is that Cruise Automation starting offering an open taxi service with full self-driving cars in San Francisco.
Oh my God, this is so cool. I cannot believe this is happening. There's no driver in here. Jamie, there's no driver in this car.
It doesn't make any sense.
I am literally witnessing the future. This is pretty impressive.
So Cruise is a self-driving car company that was acquired by General Motors, and they've been doing great progress, but with a complete different strategy from Tesla. Whereas Tesla just pushes new updates and then, asks sorry if somebody has a crash, Cruise has always been going really, really slow. And this is a huge step. These self-driving taxis are going to be able to go in San Francisco from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., so there's still just a night when there's less traffic. But San Francisco is a very complex city to drive in. Trust me, I've lived there. It's kind of crazy. It's not crazy like Rome, where I'm from, but it's still pretty crazy. So what that means is that Cruise has not solved self-driving just for simple tasks like Phoenix or big cities in Texas where there's not a lot of cars around. If they manage to make these cars drive safely in a city like San Francisco, that's a much stronger signal of success in having full self-driving cars. So good job, Cruise Automation, for this. I think the next step is going to be to use the same city but with more hours. So maybe make them go around for the full day, even during normal working hours where there's more traffic. But then I'm looking forward to see them in cities like Copenhagen or hopefully in Rome as well at some point. Last news of the week. Instagram announced some 3D avatars that you can personalize a lot and share with your friends on Messenger, Instagram, and Facebook. You can change skin color, you can change a lot of different clothing stuff. And the interesting thing is that in the announcement, they said this is a step towards the metaverse, because not everybody is going to enjoy the metaverse from crazy VR glasses. A lot of people want to participate in the new concept of the metaverse through the devices that they are used to use, like smartphones or desktop computers or iPads. And so having 3D avatars that can work both on Instagram and Facebook on a smartphone screen, but also in VR, is a step towards bridging these two worlds. Something interesting as well is that they had a strong emphasis in their announcement on making them more easy to personalize. So you can change clothing, for instance, which again is making me think about that kind of metaverse economy that they've been pitching for a while now. So if you can personalize the clothes of your avatar, then I guess at some point Nike, Adidas, and all sorts of brands are going to be able to make clothing, branded clothing, for these avatars, and you're going to be able to buy them. I feel like all this innovation is happening much faster than we think, and this is going to be a huge step because, again, everybody has a smartphone today, so everybody with these new 3D avatars is going to be able to make a small first step in the direction that Mark Zuckerberg wants, basically. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining, and as usual, please comment on this news. This is really important because technology affects all of us, so we all should participate in the conversation. And if you want to participate in this conversation even more, I recommend you check out my AI Academy Club. We organize bi-weekly deep dives where for 1 hour and a half we cover all the most important breakthroughs in technology. We talk about NFTs, metaverse, self-driving cars, all sorts of stuff. And you're going to be able to hear my explanations of these topics for roughly 40 minutes and then have a brainstorming session with all the people in my network. It's lots of fun. I think you should join it. Check out the link in the description. See you next week. Ciao.